I don't want an answer. I want a journey. I want snippets. I want inspiration. So much of like the AI stuff happening, it's all about cutting the process short, getting quickly to the end result. Sublime is still a baby. We have 4,000 people using Sublime. A good chunk of them are loving it. Most of the world doesn't know about it. There are AI doomers who think AI will kill us. And there are techno utopians that think it will solve all our problems. And I think my preference is for a more sensible approach, which is, determine like what your unique goals are, and then view AI, the technology, through the lens of whether it helps you achieve those goals. The technology has no will. It has no spite. It's just a tool. We get to choose what matters and design for that. And so in the context of PKM, which stands for Personal Knowledge Management, which is the space that I'm building in as the founder of Sublime, we have an opportunity to choose how to use AI. And I'm not going to, I don't want to go live in a cabin and swear off this technology. I actually like this stuff. But how do we weave it into Sublime? And so we're making decisions around, for example, Sublime is a place where people store the things that move them, the interesting highlights and passages and articles and knowledge that they're collecting on the internet. We could go down the path of saying, let's, when you type in a search query to Sublime, get one answer that is an aggregation of everything on Sublime. But I personally, because part of my value is believing in process over output, we don't necessarily want answers. We want good journeys. We want good questions. Actually, what's cool about Sublime is that because I'm using it to think in public, I have rabbit holes around all of these things. We're less interested in AI as text generation. We're more interested in AI as a thinking engine. If I could press a button and have all of that figured out for me, I wouldn't. Time is brutal. Building a company while raising children is brutal. I always wonder when I pick up my son at daycare, there's the Sari that writes this newsletter that people get that often touches their soul and uplifts them and inspires them. And then there's the me that is in a rush, has maybe not engaged with some of these parents who, for all I know, they're like, there's like this like grumpy like mom that's like in a rush, or we don't even know like what she does. And so that's sort of the tension, right? It's time is everything. Like attention is so sacred, and being able to say no, and you just like your life is a function of like what you give a damn about. And you can't give a damn about everything, because yes to everything is yes to nothing. Revenue gives you the freedom to honor your values. Sublime is such a values-driven initiative. It's such a values-driven company that we just want to be able to operate independently, generate enough cash flow such that we control our destinies. Our work was with our hands, with our muscles, before the information era. And so, like this idea of thinking as working doesn't really match with working on an assembly line at a factory where our output is so directly correlated to how many times we're just sitting there doing stuff and moving things from one place to the other. And so now it's sort of like the world's changed. It's more important to make the right decision than it is like to work on the right thing than it is to work many hours. And we just haven't fully made that cultural shift, where and there's something sort of like intangible, ineffable, hard to measure about creativity. I think what I'm getting at there is that creativity is incredibly valuable, and you can engineer it. It's not always it doesn't operate under the same rules as like assembly work. It requires a little bit of laziness, because creativity is a function of connecting ideas, and sometimes it's going for a walk and two things make sense, or, like visiting a museum in the middle of the day and like some idea, like becomes the seed for the breakthrough that you needed in a product. And so, yeah, I just don't think our industrial era sort of relics are consistent with those values. And honestly, I think with AI, we've been so conditioned for a productivity mindset where we just have to like, measure everything and work many hours and everything's output driven. And I think that we desperately need to make the shift to creativity, because humans have no business competing with robots on quantity, abundance, scale, but quality and taste. And these things that take a lot of time to marinate, that's where our true competitive advantage is. I just worry that we don't have a way to value those things. Ezra Klein interviewing Holly, who's a musician, about AI. And something was said there that I thought was so spot on, because I think it highlights the importance of words and language in the context of how we understand this technology. So when you think of a word like artificial intelligence, it's threatening, right? The word artificial, it means somebody can replace me artificially without me doing anything. Somebody can do my work. My special sauce can be automated. And I think that is part of why a lot of people are scared of AI, because, the language we've wrapped it around, the people that are at the helm. Oftentimes you'll see some of the larger AI companies whose stated mission is to like bring AI to the world. So like, that is so vague. Well, what does that even mean? Like, nobody cares about AI. They care about what AI can do for them. And so in this podcast, Holly was saying something, I'm going to butcher like the exact words, but something about how if AI was seen instead of artificial intelligence as collective intelligence, it would change everything. And truly, at the end of the day, what AI is collective intelligence, because what do LLMs do? They essentially let you aggregate based on like a statistical aggregation of all of the stuff that's been produced by humanity, or a big chunk of that. They help you summon that in an instant, right? ChatGPT is not going to tell me what you think about a topic. We are drowning in information, but starving for knowledge and wisdom. There's a sense of wisdom has to be lived in some way, right? Like information can go at the speed of light, but that doesn't mean we've internalized it in our core. That doesn't mean we've converted it into knowledge and wisdom and meaning. And I think there's such a difference between reading an insight and fully embodying it. And I think so much of what we need to do is like, we need less, in some ways. Before, we lived in a scarce society before, where there was not enough information. In fact, when Google got started, there was not enough information. They had to go out and, get people to write posts about gardening because there was none on the internet. And now we're in the opposite, right? There's so much abundance. And so that's the risk, right? That we drown in information, but ultimately, deprive ourselves of the time and space that is required to fully embody that information and convert it into wisdom. When you have networks mediated by the internet, instead of a hotel, you have something like Airbnb, where there's the people managing Airbnb, there's the hosts of Airbnb, there's the customers of Airbnb, there's the shareholders of Airbnb. And the value of Airbnb, the stakeholders, it's very important for the hosts to be happy. So, part of what I was sort of intending there is we should be able to create mechanisms, ways of organizing that reward the hosts in Airbnb's case, right? We should be able to, what is like think of something like McKinsey. I can't imagine anything more kind of like a less useful structure for convening people that just, I don't know, so devoid of meaning, so full of bullshit. And, I think a big part of the reason why, a lot of people that work in those companies don't come together and create their own sort of micro organizations is because we don't really have the infrastructure for that. Beyond that, I want to plug Yancey Strickler's project. Yancey is the founder of Kickstarter, who's now working on Meta Label. And I think he's been very early in trying to kind of both explore the philosophy and build something practical around this idea of creating more infrastructure for groups of people, right? Because we basically have corporations, we have like the individual stuff. If you think about the creator economy with the YouTuber and the Instagram influencer, but what about small groups of people, right? Something that sits in between the giant corporation and the individual. And I think that that is what people want and crave. And, on the one hand, like, a lot of like corporation stuff is like bullshit jobs, in the words of David Graeber. A lot of the individual stuff is also, people are sort of like more interested in collaborating over just competing for likes. And so I have this spidey sense that there's other structures that we can explore, both philosophically, from an organizational standpoint, from a tools perspective. Because when something is easy, people will do more of it, right? The moment that it became really easy to raise funding for a startup using a safe, because YC invented the safe, then everyone was raising funding for startups using a safe. And so I just feel like we need more templates of what these kinds of organizations can look like when they're owned by its contributors or groups of people, so it's a little bit all over the place. Like in fact, like even on Sublime, I always like dream of a world where a portion of Sublime, the company, were owned by the people using it. How much more incentivized would the people be beyond the utility they get from the product if they felt part owners? There's a lot of people that are taking the view that, humans shouldn't even be choosing what matters. Let's automatically create a knowledge graph of all the things they've seen and heard and read on the internet. That's the passive approach. With Sublime, we take the opposite approach, which is intentionality matters. When you go into your Sublime library and you create a collection and you add things to it, that's just so intentional. And that, and there's just so much more signal than noise. Like what matters most is understanding what you value, what your goals are, and then using the technology to further those means. I'm thinking a lot about the process. I think it is so easy to get attached to outcomes. And the result of that can be, instead of like living your life, you're waiting for it. And the goalposts keep shifting. And it's this illusion that someday, somehow you will have it figured out. And that day never comes. It sort of makes you feel like you have an assistant that's kind of giving you some tips along the way, but you're still you. You're still human. You still matter. I'm excited about the day when I have a lot more time to spare. I think a good measure of success is how much time you have to spare. Life is not just outcome. Life is a story. What is the kind of story that we want to tell ourselves at the end of this?